Welcome back on Spillover. Y'all, a dead man was right. And that is the part that is making Chicago go completely silent right now. Before Fredo Santana passed away on January 19, 2018, he allegedly sat in front of a camera and said something so specific, so pointed, so surgically accurate about the people surrounding Lil Durk that when that old clip resurfaced in 2026, 8 years later, the comment sections on every major hip-hop platform went into complete meltdown. Not because it was shocking, because it was correct. Word for word, name for name, pattern for pattern. And the people who needed that warning the most were allegedly the ones who never listened to it. But here is what nobody is asking. If Fredo Santana saw it coming that clearly, if a man who grew up in the same streets, who built the same foundation, who loved Durk like a brother could look at that circle and allegedly say out loud that something was deeply wrong, then why did it take this long for the rest of the world to catch up? And more importantly, who in that circle knew exactly what Fredo was talking about and made sure that clips stayed buried for as long as possible? You need to stay right here. Because this is not just about a viral clip. This is about a warning that was allegedly ignored, a circle that allegedly collapsed from the inside, and a dead man whose words are now doing more damage to Oblock's reputation than any federal indictment ever could. Do not move. Because the first thing I am about to tell you about Fredo's actual words changes everything you thought you knew about Lil Durk's rise. To understand why that Fredo Santana clip is hitting differently in 2026 than it did when it was first recorded, you have to understand what Fredo Santana actually was to Chicago, and more specifically, what he was to Lil Durk. Because the mainstream narrative has always tried to reduce Fredo to a footnote, a cautionary tale. A talented artist who burned out too fast and left too soon. But the people who were actually present for the building of drill music as a cultural movement know something different. They know that Fredo Santana was not just Lil Durk's cousin and co-founder of Savage Squad Records. He was the ideological architect of everything that Oblock eventually became. He was the one who understood before almost anyone else in that Chicago ecosystem that the streets and the music industry were two entirely different games, and that the rules that kept you alive in one would get you destroyed in the other. Fredo grew up in Englewood on Chicago's South Side. He was born Derek Coleman on July 4, 1990, and by the time he and Lil Durk began building what would become one of the most influential drill movements in hip-hop history, he had already seen enough of Chicago street politics to understand something fundamental about loyalty, which is that it is the rarest currency in any environment where survival is the primary motivation. He had watched friendships dissolve under pressure. He had watched people he trusted make decisions that prioritized their own survival over everything they had allegedly promised. And when he began building with Durk, reportedly, the one thing he was most vocal about, the one conversation that sources close to both men claim he returned to repeatedly, was the question of who was actually around them for the right reasons. And here is where it gets interesting. Because in the clip that has now resurfaced and spread across every major hip-hop platform, Fredo allegedly does not speak in vague generalities. He does not give a motivational speech about loyalty in the abstract. According to multiple people who have analyzed the footage and cross-referenced it with what they knew about the Oblock inner circle at the time, Fredo is allegedly describing specific behavioral patterns, specific types of people, specific warning signs that he claimed were already visible to anyone paying close enough attention. He allegedly said, and these are the words that are now echoing across comment sections from Chicago to Atlanta to New York, that the people who smile the hardest in your face are almost always the same people who are building something behind your back. That in a circle where everyone is competing for proximity to the person at the top, loyalty is not a value, it is a performance. And performances, Fredo allegedly warned, always end. Now think about when that clip was recorded. Think about the timeline. Because this is not a warning that Fredo issued after everything fell apart. This is allegedly a warning he issued while everything was still being built, while Durk was still climbing, while the circle was still expanding, while the money was starting to come in and new faces were appearing around the core group with increasing frequency. And according to insiders who were present during that period, Fredo was not speaking hypothetically. He was allegedly watching specific people, tracking specific behaviors, and reportedly telling Durk directly, in private conversations that sources claim grew more urgent as 2017 approached, that not everyone who was eating at the table had helped build it. But here is what makes this clip so devastating in 2026 specifically. It is not just that Fredo was right. It is that the timeline of everything he allegedly warned about maps almost perfectly onto the sequence of events that ultimately led to the federal cases, the fallen relationships, the public betrayals, and the very specific unraveling of the Oblock circle that the world has been watching in real time over the last 3 years. When Lil Durk's close associate Quando Rondo became the central figure in one of the most painful and public tragedies in recent Chicago rap history, the death of King Von on November 6, 2020, the conversation about who was really loyal and who was really just in proximity immediately intensified. But the people who had heard Fredo's alleged warnings years earlier were not surprised. They were just heartbroken. Because allegedly, some of them had tried to echo what Fredo said, had tried to surface the same concerns through different voices, and had reportedly been dismissed or distanced for doing so. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because the Fredo clip is not going viral right now simply because people are nostalgic for a lost artist. It is going viral because in the current climate, with Lil Durk facing his own serious federal legal situation, with former associates making decisions that have sent shockwaves through the entire drill community, with the YSL RICO case having already demonstrated in devastating legal detail exactly how prosecutors view the relationships and communications within these circles. People are going back and listening to Fredo's alleged words with completely new ears. And what they are hearing is not a general statement about street loyalty. What they are allegedly hearing is a description of the exact mechanism by which a tight-knit circle gets infiltrated, compromised, and ultimately turned against itself. Sources close to the Chicago music scene claim that when Fredo made those statements, there were at least 2 or 3 people in Durk's immediate circle who knew exactly who Fredo was talking about, who recognized themselves in the description, and who allegedly made a very deliberate decision to increase their performance of loyalty, to become more visible, more vocal, more publicly dedicated to Durk, precisely because they understood that Fredo had seen through the act. Think about what that implies. Think about what it means when the people being warned about are also the people who are present for the warning. Think about the kind of psychological chess that gets played in environments where trust is the most valuable and most dangerous commodity simultaneously. Fredo Santana passed away at 27 years old. The official cause was a seizure, connected to years of lean consumption that had allegedly caused serious kidney and liver damage. He died on January 19, 2018, in Los Angeles. And within weeks of his passing, according to multiple people close to the situation, the dynamics inside Durk's circle allegedly began shifting in ways that Fredo had reportedly predicted almost to the letter. New voices moved closer. Old voices got quieter. The careful architecture of trust that Fredo had allegedly tried to protect started developing the exact cracks he had warned about. And the people who had been in that circle long enough to remember what Fredo said were allegedly watching it happen in slow motion, unable to stop it, because the one person who had the credibility and the relationship to call it out directly was no longer there to do so. Now here is the twist. Because the resurfacing of this clip in 2026 is allegedly not accidental. According to sources familiar with the current situation around Durk's circle, someone with direct knowledge of the original context of that footage made a very deliberate decision to surface it right now, at this specific moment. When Durk's legal situation is at its most serious and the conversation about who said what to whom and who cooperated with whom is at its most volatile. And if that is true, if the timing of this clip's re-emergence is intentional rather than coincidental, then the question you need to be sitting with right now is not just what did Fredo say. The question is who needed the world to hear it again right now. And more importantly, what do they know that we do not? We get into exactly who in that circle Fredo was allegedly watching most closely, and what allegedly happened to those specific people in the years after he was no longer around to keep calling it out. And to do that properly, we have to talk about the architecture of Oblock itself. Because Oblock is not just a neighborhood. It is not just a set. In the context of Lil Durk's rise, Oblock became a brand, a movement, and allegedly a very specific internal hierarchy. And understanding how that hierarchy was structured is the only way to understand why Fredo's warnings were so difficult to act on even when the people closest to Durk allegedly agreed with them. Oblock, officially the 6400 block of South Drive Martin Luther King Drive in Chicago's Woodlawn neighborhood, produced a generation of artists and street figures whose interconnected relationships became the raw material for some of the most emotionally resonant drill music ever recorded. Lil Durk, King Von, Buka 600, Memo 600, these were not just associates with a shared geography. They were allegedly a brotherhood forged under conditions that most people consuming their music from the outside will never fully understand. And within that brotherhood, according to sources who were present during the formative years, there was an unspoken but clearly understood ranking of trust. There were people who were inside the core, and there were people who were allegedly always performing proximity to the core without ever actually being admitted into it. Fredo Santana, despite being based in Englewood rather than Oblock directly, had allegedly earned a level of access to Durk's innermost thinking that very few people outside the immediate family structure possessed. And according to insiders, it was precisely that access, that ability to have real unfiltered conversations with Durk about what was actually happening around him, that made Fredo's concerns so significant. Because when someone that close, with that level of genuine relationship, starts allegedly pointing at specific patterns and saying something is wrong, it is not paranoia. It is information. And the information Fredo was allegedly trying to surface in that clip was centered on one specific dynamic that sources claim he returned to again and again in his private conversations with Durk. The dynamic of people who use moments of crisis and vulnerability to deepen their position rather than to genuinely support the person going through them. And here is where it gets interesting. Because if you map that specific dynamic onto the timeline of Durk's career and personal life between 2017 and 2023, the pattern allegedly emerges with a clarity that is almost impossible to argue with. Every time Durk faced a significant personal loss, and there have been devastating ones, King Von's death being the most public and most painful, sources claim that certain individuals in the circle moved with unusual speed to position themselves as the primary support system. Not because they were necessarily the most qualified or the most genuinely connected emotionally, but allegedly because they understood that grief and trauma create a specific kind of access. A specific kind of trust. And that trust, reportedly, was exactly what Fredo had warned was being targeted. Now here is what they allegedly did not want you to find out. Because in the months following King Von's death on November 6, 2020, the internal conversations happening within the Oblock circle were allegedly far more complicated than what the public saw. The public saw Durk grieve. The public saw tribute posts and music made in Von's memory. What the public did not see, according to sources close to multiple people involved, was the alleged internal maneuvering that began almost immediately around questions of Von's legacy, his catalog, his business relationships, and his digital presence. A presence that, in the streaming era, represented real and ongoing financial value. And according to insiders, the people allegedly moving fastest on those questions were not always the people who had been closest to Von when he was alive. This is the part that nobody is talking about. Because the conversation around Oblock loyalty in 2026 is almost entirely focused on the federal legal dimensions, on who said what in court documents, on who was named in what filing, on who allegedly cooperated with investigators in ways that violated the street code that the music itself was built on. And those are real and serious and important dimensions of the story. But underneath all of that legal conversation, allegedly, is a much older and much more human story about the slow erosion of a circle that one man tried to protect while he was still alive to do so. And that man was Fredo Santana. And the clip that is haunting Oblock right now is haunting it not because it is new information, but because the people who remember hearing it the first time are allegedly watching the exact scenario it described play out in federal courtrooms and Instagram posts and public betrayals in real time. Now let us talk specifically about the YSL RICO case. Because this is where Fredo's alleged warnings move from the abstract to the devastatingly concrete. When federal prosecutors in Atlanta unsealed the RICO indictment against Young Slime Life in May 2022, what emerged was not just a legal document. It was allegedly a detailed map of exactly how a circle built on loyalty and brotherhood can be dismantled from the inside when the pressure becomes sufficient. Multiple co-defendants eventually took plea deals. Statements were made. Relationships that had been publicly performed as unbreakable allegedly turned out to be far more conditional than anyone had presented them to be. And while YSL and Oblock are distinct organizations with distinct structures, the people watching from inside the Chicago drill community reportedly saw the parallels immediately. Because the mechanism was allegedly the same. The vulnerability was allegedly the same. and the type of people Fredo had allegedly warned about, the performers of loyalty rather than the practitioners of it, were allegedly present in both ecosystems. Sources claim that when the YSL indictment became public and the implications for people connected to Durk's circle began to crystallize, there were private conversations happening at the highest levels of that world about exactly which relationships could be trusted and which ones had allegedly been compromised long before any federal document made it official. And according to one source who claims to have been present for one of those conversations, Fredo Santana's name came up, not as a legend being honored, not as a fallen soldier being memorialized, but as someone who had allegedly been right. Specifically right. About specific people who were now allegedly at the center of the most serious legal and reputational crisis in Oblock's history. Reportedly, one person in that conversation allegedly said something that has since circulated quietly through certain circles in Chicago, that if Fredo had lived, none of this would have gotten this far. That his presence alone, his willingness to say the uncomfortable thing directly to Durk's face without softening it, was the one check on the system that could not be replaced once it was gone. Where we get into what is allegedly happening inside Durk's world right now in 2026, and why the specific timing of this clip's resurgence is allegedly connected to something that has not become fully public yet. And to understand that, you need to understand the position Lil Durk is currently in, because it is unlike any position he has ever been in before. And the people allegedly moving around him right now, according to sources close to the situation, are doing so with a level of calculation that would have immediately triggered every warning instinct Fredo Santana ever tried to develop in him. As of 2026, Lil Durk is facing serious federal charges. The specifics of those charges and the legal proceedings around them have been extensively covered in the mainstream press. But what has not been covered, what the mainstream press does not have access to and reportedly does not fully understand, is the internal dynamic inside Durk's circle as those charges have intensified. Because when a figure of Durk's stature faces the kind of legal pressure that federal prosecutors are capable of generating, the circle around that person does not stay static. It moves. It reshuffles. Allegiances that were allegedly maintained purely through proximity to power suddenly have to be re-evaluated in a world where that power is under direct assault. And the people who were allegedly always performing loyalty rather than practicing it are reportedly the first ones to start making quiet calculations about their own exposure and their own futures. Sources close to the situation claim that in the months leading up to Durk's most recent legal developments, there were individuals in and around his circle who were allegedly having conversations that Durk himself was not present for and was allegedly not informed about. Conversations that, according to insiders, touched on topics that no genuinely loyal person would be discussing without the direct knowledge and consent of the person at the center of the situation. And here's what they allegedly did not want you to find out, because this is the detail that connects directly back to Fredo's clip and explains why its resurgence right now is allegedly not organic. According to a source who claims proximity to multiple people involved, the Fredo Santana clip was not simply rediscovered by a random fan scrolling through old footage. It was allegedly surfaced deliberately by someone who wanted to send a message. Someone who understood that in the current climate, with Durk's legal situation creating a specific kind of pressure and a specific kind of vulnerability, reminding the world of Fredo's alleged warnings would land with maximum impact. And the intended audience for that message was allegedly not the general public. It was allegedly the specific people inside the circle who recognized themselves in Fredo's description. People who knew exactly what Fredo had seen, and who allegedly needed to understand that someone still remembered what Fredo said, and was watching to see whether history was repeating itself. Now here is the twist. Because if that account is accurate, if this clip's reemergence is a deliberate act of communication rather than an accidental rediscovery, then what we are witnessing right now is allegedly a form of conflict that operates entirely outside the traditional frameworks that hip-hop beef usually occupies. There are no diss tracks here. There are no Instagram posts with barely coded language. There are no interviews where someone says just enough to make the point without crossing a legal line. What is allegedly happening instead is something more subtle and more dangerous. A conversation being conducted entirely through implication, through the strategic deployment of a dead man's words, through the placement of old footage at a moment specifically calculated to make certain people feel seen and certain other people feel exposed. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because the mainstream hip-hop media is covering Fredo's clip as a nostalgia story, as a tribute, as evidence of how prophetic he was as a thinker and how tragic his early death was for Chicago. And all of those framings are true, but they are also allegedly missing the point entirely. Because the people inside the actual situation are not engaging with this clip as a tribute. They are engaging with it as a warning shot. And warning shots in this specific environment, in the world where Durk's legal future is genuinely uncertain and the people around him are allegedly making calculations that could affect that future, are never just symbolic. Let us talk about what Fredo's legacy actually represents to the generation of Chicago artists who came after him. Because this matters for understanding why his words carry the specific weight they carry right now. Fredo Santana was not just an artist who died young. He was allegedly someone who understood the intersection of street life and industry life with a clarity that very few people in either world possessed. He understood that the music industry was not a safe harbor from the streets. It was a different version of the same game, with different rules but identical stakes. And he allegedly understood that the most dangerous people in any room are not the ones who present themselves as enemies. They are the ones who present themselves as family, while allegedly building something that serves only themselves. Reportedly, in the final year of his life, Fredo had begun speaking more openly about wanting to create some distance between the music side and the street side of the world he had helped build. Sources claim he was genuinely concerned about the trajectory of certain relationships and certain dynamics. And according to people who spoke with him during that period, he was increasingly focused on the question of what would happen to Durk specifically if the wrong people were allowed to get too close during a moment of vulnerability. He allegedly said, according to one person who claims to have had this conversation directly with him, that the test of a circle is not what happens when everything is going well. The test of a circle is what happens when the person at the center needs protection rather than proximity. And allegedly, Fredo was not confident that everyone around Durk would pass that test. 8 years later, in 2026, with Durk's legal situation at its most serious and the circle that Fredo helped build allegedly fracturing in ways that are becoming visible even to people on the outside, those words are not philosophical anymore. They are allegedly a live and active description of something that is happening right now. And the people in Chicago who remember Fredo, who knew him, who heard him say these things in real time rather than through a resurfaced clip, those people are allegedly watching the current situation with a very specific kind of grief. Not just for Fredo, but for the possibility that what he allegedly tried to prevent is unfolding exactly as he said it would. Because a dead man being right is not a victory. It is a tragedy. And in Chicago right now, allegedly, it is both. The clip is haunting Oblock. But the real haunting is not the footage. The real haunting is the possibility that the people who needed to hear Fredo's warning most were the ones who made sure it stayed quiet for as long as possible. And now that it is out, now that the algorithm has picked it up and the comment sections are alive, and the people who remember the original context are starting to speak, the question that nobody has answered yet is the one that is going to keep this story moving for weeks and months to come. Who surfaced that clip? And what do they know about what is coming next? So here is where we are right now. A clip from a man who has been gone since 2018 is allegedly doing more damage to the carefully constructed image of an entire circle than anything a living person has said publicly. A warning that was reportedly delivered in private is now being consumed by millions of people who are mapping it in real time against a federal legal situation, a series of alleged betrayals, and a pattern of behavior that Fredo Santana reportedly described with surgical accuracy years before any of it became undeniable. But the questions that remain open are the ones that matter most right now. Who made the decision to surface that clip at this specific moment? And what do they know about what is coming in Durk's legal case that the general public does not know yet? Are there other clips? Other recordings? Other alleged conversations from that era that are being held by people who are waiting for the right moment to deploy them? And perhaps most importantly, is there anyone left inside that circle who still has the kind of genuine loyalty that Fredo allegedly described? And if so, are they in a position to actually use it? This story is not finished. It is not even close to finished. And if you want to be here when the next piece drops, you need to subscribe right now because this channel is going to be the first place it lands. But before you do anything else, I need you to go to the comments and answer this one question. Do you believe that the people closest to Lil Durk right now are genuinely loyal? Or are they the exact people Fredo Santana allegedly warned him about? There is no right answer. That is exactly why I need you to argue about it. Because sometimes the most dangerous truth is the one that everyone already knows but nobody is willing to say first.